Hello, and welcome to Museum of Gaming. While games in the mythical olden days had a reputation for difficulty, it was a response to technological limitations and small amounts of actual game. If a player had only 8 levels to push through, it was best to make them as difficult as possible so they took a decent length of time. But occasionally, along comes a game so bizarrely hard and vanishingly rare that it's hard to believe anyone ever thought it would be fun. What's more unusual though, is when it turns out to actually be fun. This is Mr. Gimmick. There are many things which make Mr. Gimmick unique. First, it was brought to the Famicom in 1992 and the NES in 1993, making it one of the last games brought to those systems at a time when the Super NES was at the height of its popularity and the PlayStation was only a couple of years away from launch. The decision to use the NES was typical of developer Sunsoft, and was a tendency which would eventually lead to the company's demise, but it did at least provide an opportunity to show off the best of the console's capabilities. Secondly, the game contained a dedicated sound chip, which allowed the game to output sound, in the Japanese version at least, well beyond the capabilities of the Famicom alone. Thirdly, the game had a very specific and very strange launch. Though released to lackluster sales in Japan in early 1992, Gimmick, as it was then known, was announced for US release in the later part of that year. Although an English translation was produced, it was not released in the USA, but instead brought to an entirely different part of the world. Where? Scandinavia. These 3 countries actually received a fair number of exclusive games around that time, many of which, including Mr. Gimmick, went on to become rare indeed. Standing alongside it are the Enix RPG Soul Blazer, and the Nintendo Scope light gun game with the thrilling title of X-Zone. Mr. Gimmick covers the adventures of Yumataro, an animated doll who must save his owner from an alternate dimension where she is being held hostage by the other jealous toys. So far, so Japan, but what really set Mr. Gimmick apart and which still makes it unique is how it is played. The action takes place in a fairly standard 2D world with horizontal scrolling. Yumataro has limited lives, which with the heavy number of enemies and the lightning reactions required for many levels, makes game overs extremely likely to occur. However, the player can tackle the enemy's threats with the use of a chargeable star thrown as a weapon from Yumataro's forehead in a similar way to Kirby. The star also has other effective uses, specifically serving as a temporary and fast-moving platform to allow access to secret areas. The versatility of the main weapon means that there are often multiple solutions to problems. For example, here, the player can use the obvious route of the pike to proceed past an obstacle. With clever use of the star, however, it can be bypassed, although it won't necessarily help with the ensuing boss fight. When not battling enemies or dodging attacks, Yumataro has to contend with some rather tricky platforming sections. These are unlike those found in other contemporary platformers in that, unlike Sonic and Mario, Yumataro cannot rely on his speed or luck to proceed. It's often advantageous to take a step back and examine the situation carefully before acting too rashly, or you might end up in a sticky situation. The best thing about Gimmick is that while it's certainly challenging and was very hard even for the time, it is never particularly unfair. No deaths occur as a result of broken mechanics or poor design, but are always the product of the player's own mistakes. Controller snapping frustration may be the end result, but it's heightened significantly by the knowledge that your problems are of your own making. Gimmick is very hard to find and expensive to boot, not to mention the added cost of finding a Scandinavian NES or Famicom to play it on. However, it serves as a good reminder that the most technically impressive games are often those which see release towards the ends of their generation. Unfortunately, that's also the time they are most likely to be ignored. It also tells an interesting tale of weird regional differences in game releases in the early 90s, a problem which wouldn't be straightened out until over a decade later and which sometimes continues today. While we all remember the last story in Xenoblade Chronicles being revealed as Europe only to cries of unfairness around the world, Europeans well remember waiting 3 years for Animal Crossing, about which many are still bitter. The game was never a success, and although after the demise of its publisher Sunsoft in the late 90s it did see a release on the original PlayStation in 2002, most people have never heard of it. Once more, it was apt that the re-release came about long after that system had also ceased to be relevant. Mr. Gimmick, despite its name, was a very solidly made platformer and one which should be in the library of every aspiring 2D developer, every student of game design, and everyone interested in seeing a cute little doll rescue a girl by flinging stars around. After this bright and colourful show, we'll be diving into the darkest depths of human psychology next week, as we explore Harry Mason, his search for his daughter, and some censored, naked children. It's Silent Hill. Thanks for watching the Museum of Gaming, and I'll see you next time.